So welcome to this webinar on constructing a just transition, minority businesses, and the future of building decarbonization. My name is Grant Williams. I'm the Climate Futures Program Director at MIT CoLab, and our current work focuses on ensuring we build strategies to close the racial wealth gap as we close the emissions gap and move towards a just transition in the United States. I've been excited about the work we've undertaken and developed a research and report on building decarbonization, and grateful for partnership of the team at Kyanite Partners, and I'll turn it to Saritha to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Grant. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. My name is Saritha Ramakrishna. I'm a senior associate at Kyanite Partners. We are an urban planning and economic development and strategy consulting firm based in Brooklyn. And we've been working with MIT, Grant, and the Community Innovators Lab on pulling together this research, thinking through recommendations and strategies. And yeah, excited to be here and to present our findings and, of course, to have a lovely conversation with our panelists.
Great, thanks, Saritha. So just to give folks a sense of what we're going to be doing today, to kick off, we'll walk through some of the highlights from our research and report, which includes a set of tactical strategies and case studies for building the business development infrastructure necessary to ensure MBEs are able to meet this moment in building decarbonization. And we've got several of our key case studies represented on this panel as well. For this report, we brought together a diversity of stakeholders from a number of backgrounds, including climate advocates, those with experience in business development and support, and individuals in green finance that will be supporting project implementation. We try to detail the roles and avenues for the larger goal here of bringing together minority businesses and building decarbonization implementation, and trying to take an ecosystem approach to understand the infrastructure needed for MBEs to access finance, access this new and emerging market, training critical to success in this market, and other strategies for supporting their work. After that, we'll turn it over to our esteemed panelists who represent the leading edge of innovation and implementation in the field. These folks are doing the important work of building and connecting MBEs to the building decarbonization pipeline. And then we'll shift to an open discussion with our panelists. So please feel free as we're moving along to put your questions and comments in the chat. We'll be tracking those throughout the presentation, and we'll make sure to cover those in that later section of our time together. So just a little bit of background for folks. I know we're coming from a number of different experiences and areas of expertise. We're in a really exciting moment where the Biden administration has facilitated $382 billion through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act, targeted towards decarbonizing our building stock. This is critical to our larger climate goals in the nation, as 35% of our greenhouse gas emissions are a result of our energy and heating usage. And these programs largely focus on residential application, but also offer significant investments for commercial and institutional buildings as well. One critical thing to note on these investments, they've been designed to ensure that communities of color and low-income communities are benefit to a great degree through the Justice 40 requirements, that 40% of all investments need to be implemented in low-income communities. This is critical for lowering electric bills and improving health of these communities, but it does not do enough to build accountability mechanisms to grow businesses in these relevant sectors, and is still relying on the market largely to facilitate those opportunities, which is why it's so critical that the business development infrastructure steps in to meet this moment with those strategies to ensure businesses, minority businesses, and small businesses are able to engage and build wealth in this space. And that's where we've focused our research on models and strategies that can support growing and scaling to access and succeed in these industry transitions. Just to give us a bit of a sense of what these set of investments look like, on the right, we've got the set of programs that are touching building decarbonization issues and the scale of the investments that are being implemented. And then on the left, we've got how this money is going to flow from the federal government down to projects and to owners. For the most part, a lot of this money is being deployed through the Department of Energy and the EPA, and they're facilitating through states and financial intermediaries, which those entities are critical to structure the programs and build a project pipeline for implementation. A lot of those resources will be deployed through local lenders and aggregators, as well as CBOs in some cases. And then there's also a substantial amount of investment that's happening that's facilitated directly to consumers and building owners through the credit and rebate programs. And a couple of key takeaways from this, while these investments and subsidies are public dollars, they're largely focused on deployment to privately owned buildings. That means that our primary legacy tools for supporting MBEs through public procurement contracting methods is not going to be sufficient to ensuring access for MBEs to these markets and projects. In many cases, states will be able to facilitate critical approaches in this, and in certain regions where states have a commitment to growing MBEs, that will be essential. But it largely, we need to be thinking beyond public procurement contracting while still developing those mechanisms and accountability around those mechanisms to ensure access. So what do we mean by building decarbonization? These are the set of activities and trades that will implement energy efficiency practices, upgrade heating, cooling, and appliances in buildings, and deploying renewable generation opportunities at the building scale. A lot of the renewable side we haven't tackled as much in this report. We're largely focused on the construction trades on the front end of this. But there is a number of opportunities on that side as well for growing MBEs in those spaces. And the process starts with energy audits, engineering, and energy facilities management to evaluate and develop the best strategies for retrofitting and upgrading building stock. And then implementation is happening through traditional construction trades that require new sets of skills and experience for the specific tactics and approaches to decarbonization, everything from improving insulation, sealing building envelopes, to upgrading electrical systems, to replacing fuel-based heating and appliances. So that's a bit about the opportunity of this moment and the monumental amount of investment being facilitated. Where rubber hits the road for the folks that we're most concerned and want to represent in this space is recognizing the challenges that face minority businesses to transition their practices and effectively enter this market. MBEs generally are smaller and lower revenue than non-MBEs, and this produces significant barriers to capital and to the business operational side of being able to scale to access this project pipeline. And that's reflected by a number of statistics here. We note that Black-owned firms are half as likely to receive financing as white-owned firms. So there's a lot that business development ecosystem and finance can do to help organizations and businesses overcome these barriers. And then I just want to note, I mentioned it on the flow of funds slide, but there is a significant amount of public subsidy moving through private actors. Traditional MBE public procurement practices are not going to be sufficient for ensuring that MBEs are able to scale. And so we need an ecosystem approach to connect MBEs to these market opportunities and new tools for scaling and accessing markets, which is largely what we'll focus on in the strategies and recommendations of the report. And I'll move that to Sarita to dig into the strategy side.
Thanks, Grant. So on the strategy side in the report, these recommendations and strategies were taken from the challenges that businesses are facing, as well as aspects of the funding and project implementation landscape that Grant went over. So the report offers 5 framing strategies, descriptions of what these strategies are, case studies, which will highlight, and direct applications for the building decarbonization industries. We do take an ecosystem approach. So what this means is that these strategies can encompass multiple types of stakeholders as far as the pathways towards implementation. So thinking about local governments, state DOEs who are designing and implementing rebate programs, greenhouse gas reduction fund, intermediaries and lenders, MBE technical assistance providers, all have a role to play in implementation. And for the sake of time and to make sure we have all the time for our panelists later on, We will not look at stakeholder-specific recommendations, but those can be reviewed in the actual report. And lastly, in the report, you'll see a detailed note about data collection, transparency, and accountability in the implementation of programs. You can go to the next slide. So the first strategy is networking businesses for shared support services. So basically, there's the opportunity to offer shared services that can reduce costs and improve operational efficiencies for collaborating businesses. So that what that could look like is shared back office services, accounting, human resources, IT, group purchasing to achieve economies of scale, shared solutions around bonding and insurance, and collaborations around workforce training and recruitment. So the example that is named in the report that is related to this strategy is Amicus Solar. They're a member-owned solar purchasing collaborative that includes 80 solar energy companies. And through the purchasing collaborative and the secondary cooperative, they're able to achieve economies of scale on purchasing, as well as information flow as to what's going on in the industry. We can go to the next slide. The next strategy is centering MBEs and technology adoption. We know that in these industries around building decarbonization, there's a rapid evolution of technologies that are reshaping the industry. So aligning on training and certification and ensuring that MBEs and small businesses have access to these things is really crucial. So for example, HVAC professionals working in a legacy sense, transitioning over to electrified systems such as heat pumps, thinking about software adoption by contractors, so energy efficiency and energy modeling software and the uptake and training there, and ensuring that contractors understand manufacturer-specific certifications required for installation and warranties, and the need for that training and certification to be offered across the program. So an example of this that we'll name here is Enterprise's Equity Contractor Training Program, which we're excited to have Deirdre speak about later on in the panel, which is a partnership with Honeywell to create an MBE subcontractor pipeline around the city of Boston's municipal buildings. So basically supported MBEs in getting certified with Honeywell technology, energy planning software, and supporting their business growth. We can go to the next slide. The third strategy we have here is designing and scaling capital specifically targeted to MBEs. So we know, as Grant mentioned, that MBEs face barriers in accessing traditional lending and growth capital. And there are also sector-specific financing challenges associated with how these funds are flowing. So traditional lending can often be inaccessible due to a lack of collateral, both in terms of the assets that some of these businesses have or lack thereof, since many of them don't own real estate or major assets, as well as challenges faced by MBEs. The need for cash flow and gap financing to address payment delays on contracts, alternatives and access to growth capital to scale and grow businesses. And there's a real opportunity here for actors in the financing space, greenhouse gas reduction fund intermediaries, and those they're interacting with to create tailored financial products and programs to support MBEs to participate. So two examples that we've named here from the public sector. The first is the Colorado Cash Collateral Program, which is a state-run program to increase collateral access for small businesses, which then consequently increases access to traditional financing for those businesses, removing that barrier. The second is a case study focused on the New York City Contract Financing Loan Fund, which is a fund to specifically address financing gaps for small businesses that are participating in city contracts to ensure greater access and the ability for businesses to be able to get over cash flow issues to participate in contracting. We can go to the next slide. The fourth strategy here is connecting MBEs to new marketplaces. As Grant mentioned, there's a real opportunity to set targets and be really decisive and deliberate about ensuring that there's infrastructure for MBE participation in all of these new markets. So we know that different platforms are being developed to implement these projects. So greenhouse gas reduction fund intermediaries are developing contractor lists. States are as well, local governments who are developing one-stop shops, for example, around retrofits, and even private sector actors that are working directly with building owners to streamline the process. So there's a real need for clear pathways for MBEs to be able to access these markets and a real opportunity to develop supportive infrastructure for MBEs to grow and be able to do that. And Sandra on our panel with Northwest Bronx Community and Clergy Coalition will speak about their weatherization assistance program that's longstanding to support residents in the Bronx and building owners to access retrofit services, and some of the opportunities down the road for them to support small businesses to grow a larger borough-wide economic development effort around the green economy and retrofits and building decarbonization. Go to the next slide. And the last strategy that we've named here is creating pathways for employee ownership. Knowing that there is a huge opportunity to do this in the construction industry, specifically around, we know that there are substantial gaps in succession and retirement planning for owners, and that offers a pathway to conversion to worker ownership. And we've seen this in other industries, for example, in the manufacturing industry, where retiring business owners are able to support the conversion of businesses to worker-owned cooperatives. Also, because the value of firms is often very relationship-driven, which is ideal for employees and business continuity, and the opportunity to address worker shortages and improve retention in the field, given that there are usually better retention outcomes associated with worker ownership. And the example we named here is Kaiser Permanente's Building Resilience Through Employee Ownership Program, where Kaiser, as an anchor institution in healthcare, offered their suppliers pathways to conversions to employee ownership. And so they did direct outreach to supplier businesses and were able to result in 2 companies transitioning, impacting close to 200 employees. Okay, so now we can move to our panel. I know that I just presented a lot on strategies, so feel free to add your questions in the chat and we'll get to them in the Q&A section. Want folks to engage as much as possible. But we're really excited to have this panel here. And so what we'll do is we'll basically go through individually and have folks introduce themselves and speak for a few minutes about their work and how it's aligned with what's being presented here. But we have so much expertise here, folks that have expertise in leading contractor training, growing and administering decarbonization programs, and developing small business capacity. So first, I'm going to turn it over to Sandra Lobo, who is the Executive Director of Northwest Bronx Community and Clergy Coalition. Their organization has been fighting for 50 years for racial and economic justice in the Bronx. So I'll turn it over to Sandra.
Thank you, Sarita, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the invitation to be here. So as Sarita mentioned, Sandra Lobo, Executive Director at Northwest Bronx Community Clergy Coalition, and we consider ourselves a grassroots member-led organization that works for racial, economic, and environmental justice. We were born as a response to redlining and disinvestment in the 1970s, and we've been organizing around housing, education, health, environmental sustainability, community and economic development, centering those most directly impacted in these campaigns. And we also have, as Sarita mentioned, a 45-year-old weatherization assistance program, the second largest in New York State, that utilizes federal and state funding to retrofit low-income homes and multifamily buildings. So I come to this work in a very kind of different place than most folks. We are, grassroots community organizing, and I think that has helped us kind of get a sense of a different kind of approach to the work. And so the history of redlining and disinvestment in the Bronx in particular, I want to bring to the conversation in my introduction, because I think it has had a deep and long-lasting impact on our borough of 1.4 million people. And it kind of speaks to how we go about our work and some of the strategies that we ultimately have developed. And so I'll share a little bit about that. So today, our overall poverty rate in the Bronx is about 25%. It's nearly double of the state of New York, although some of our neighborhoods have poverty rates as high as 40%. Median income of the borough is $41,000, with some households earning less than $30,000. Unemployment rates are high, especially after COVID, where unemployment rate was 25% in the Bronx. And so as a result, over 60% of households are rent burdened in the Bronx. We now have some of the highest rates of eviction right here in our neighborhood in Kingsbridge, where displacement and gentrification pressures are kind of pushing low-income, long-time residents out of their homes that they've been living in for decades. And then finally, we're placed last in health outcomes in the state, and have one of the highest asthma hospitalization rates in New York City due to poor air quality, pollutants from poor housing conditions, fossil fuels, and more. So our work at Northwest Bronx has been focused on organizing around structural changes, understanding the complexities and the intersections of these issues, housing inequality, climate change, and economic development, and then creating projects and initiatives that center the folks that are directly impacted, from businesses to tenants to workers. And so one example I wanted to highlight is the Healthy Buildings program, which is a prototype that we started about 10 years ago, of how we might build an ecosystem that connects tenant organizing for housing improvements with the deep desire to address climate change and improve health outcomes, and then ultimately create pathways for community wealth building. So the Northwest Bronx has been organizing tenants since day one for 50 years, and implementing our weatherization retrofits for almost that long, helping to improve housing conditions, reduce energy consumption, and lowering costs ultimately for tenants in these buildings. And part of our work a number of years ago was examining the various root causes of the health disparities, right? We're the worst in the state. Using the social determinants of health framework, we were really able to begin to make the connections between unemployment, poverty, poor housing conditions, these high rates of asthma. And we developed a program that sought to train local workers in the field of, at the time was integrative pest management, which buildings desperately needed. Folks were having visits to the hospital because of asthma, because of the poor air quality in the buildings. These buildings desperately needed this service, but we did not have local businesses that had the capacity to do that. So we trained workers, we supported local IPM businesses that were MWBEs, some of which were worker co-ops. And then ultimately, we leveraged our housing organizing to create the demand for these services, which would ultimately improve health and housing conditions for the residents. And so for us, really the idea was to create a supply chain that included everything from training local workers to organizing small businesses, and then driving this demand for these retrofits. Building this ecosystem, we were really able to ensure that local businesses, MWBEs, and workers were benefiting from the just transition, while also improving outcomes for tenants who, because of their organizing strategies, actually had some power to direct the kinds of work that they wanted in the buildings and who should be doing the work in these buildings. And so now we're scaling this ecosystem approach, working with faith, community, labor, and more recently, government partners across the borough of the Bronx. Designing a long-term economic development plan that is centering climate resiliency and shared wealth building. And core to this is aligning funding to train these workers in the green industry, supporting MWBEs, and to drive the demand for climate resiliency projects across the borough. And I can talk a little bit about this later. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sandra. Really appreciate the introduction to your work and the sort of long history it built upon. We're now going to go over to Deirdre Coyle, who's the Senior Director of Strategy at Innovators. They have significant experience growing and supporting MBEs through a variety of programs, specifically related to anchor institutions. So I'll turn it over to her to talk through their perspective on this.
Hi there. So thank you. I'm very excited to be here. And yes, and here is a presentation that will just kind of punctuate, shall we say, what we are talking about. But again, thank you for that introduction. Innovators has been around actually for 20 plus years. We're celebrating our 20th anniversary right now. And, the goal of Innovators was to basically provide technical assistance and training to MWBEs and companies located in low wealth areas with the business know-how, tools, peer-to-peer networks, et cetera, that they needed to move from being what we call an established small business into a growth business that could scale and grow and take advantage and contribute, in a greater way to the local economy. And we've done that very successfully over the past 20 years. About 15 years ago, we do an incredible amount of research, and we're able to see that our small businesses, after participating in Streetwise MBA, grew a significant amount, in between 10 and 20%. We're hiring from their local community, et cetera. But what really stood out to us is that those companies, MWBEs, that actually secured contracts were growing much higher. They were growing around 25 to 48%, incredible sustainability, projection over their growth plan of continuing down that way. And so that made us pause and think, okay, how can we really leverage this and take advantage of this to understand better what is going around procurement, and also what industries and opportunities would be available. And so, as you heard from Grant, there's an incredible opportunity right now in the US around procurement opportunities attached to the infrastructure bill, and attached to the Inflation Reduction Act. And I'm also going to talk about the climate bill that is put forward. And these three bills alone represent $3 trillion. And that sum demands attention. And so, a lot of this money is going to be coming into cities and towns across America, and also being directed towards corporations and others. And we felt that, we need to figure out a way. What we do is good and has high impact. How can we leverage that and create an opportunity that kind of pushes it forward more? So I'm going to give you the next slide and just give you some data points. So 15%, that's what represents Black and brown wealth in America, or 75% less than the white households in America. That's what we are all working to change the outcomes. And why? Because if we change that, the economy can expect to grow by $3 to $5 trillion by just solving for this disparity. And making sure minority-owned businesses get the same opportunities that white-owned businesses is an opportunity. It seems unlikely, but as I said, there's a 45% growth of MWBEs that happens when they secure contracts, whether directly from the government or as a subcontractor. So how is that all going to work? Next slide. Or how does that work for us? So what we have here is, as I said, a historic moment. We want to make sure that we take advantage of this moment. There are systemic problems of racial, gender, wealth disparity in America. And so as we all are working to change outcomes, and as I'm sure some of you are familiar with Philip Gaskin, who used to be at the Kauffman Foundation, he says, entrepreneurship is key to inclusivity, rebuilding America's infrastructure, and changing climate outcomes. Given the historic difficulty that women and BIPOC business people have in securing small business loans, half of our nation's potential entrepreneurs are still sitting on the sidelines. Next slide. So how do we boost minority-owned and women-owned small businesses? As I said, we know that securing contracts matters. When a small business has a client with an allocated budget over multiple years, this entrepreneur is more likely to hire employees. Most of those are local employees, invest in their business. And, we actually refer to as the contracting factor or procurement empowerment. Some federal, and I think it's important to note this, some federal contracts and local government contracts may go directly to MWBEs, but we are also encouraging anchor businesses, corporations, university, hospitals, et cetera, to use MWBEs as contractors, as well as these corporations oftentimes secure the largest contracts with governments that then they need to fulfill subcontractor roles. So we're trying to hit the whole kind of ecosystem of where MBEs can become contract ready and also secure contracts. Next slide. So this, again, it makes good business sense, not only for MWBEs and for the ecosystem, but also for government anchor institutions. Diversifying procurement contracts has a huge upside for both cities and states. If you invest in your community, you're burnishing your brand and making sure that you are developing a more kind of socially and economically sustainable group. You create competition among suppliers, driving down costs and improving quality, and you make supply chains more agile and resilient. So our research has shown that investing in companies owned by people of color, they grow, higher and I'm sorry, at a higher growth rate, and unleash entrepreneurship among untapped populations and in low wealth areas. So this is also a huge vehicle for creating MWBs as well. So then next slide. So after, again, seeing that this was a huge opportunity for MWBEs in procurement and, overlaying that, these huge federal opportunities that would come, happen both at the federal government side, but also would, push into states and cities, we developed what we call the Minority Supplier Capacity Building Program. And this is anchored with our current programs, the Streetwise MBA program and our Small Business Stronger program, but we are now working on the buyer side of the equation, not just the supplier side of the equation. And so, as was mentioned, we are working closely right now with Honeywell. Honeywell, I'm sure you're all familiar with Honeywell, but they have a number of contracts across the country, but in Boston in particular, that is a 10 to 15 year long contract to basically retrofit old buildings across Boston and make sure that they are up to code and also are more climate resilient and all of the things that are very important to all of us in that way. The challenge Honeywell had is that while they wanted to use MWBEs, which is a requirement of their contract with the city, they were having a tough time finding them. And at the same time, the city of Boston, while they had that requirement, also had smaller contracts in this sphere of work that was going to be, dedicated towards MWBEs, but they also were having a trouble finding the companies in those trades with that expertise. So we developed a program with Honeywell in which we worked with them. What were the trades that they needed immediately for where they were in the contracts, and what were the trades that they would need later and down the line, so that we could again start to develop a pipeline. So we just graduated the first program, and where, it surprised even us. We thought that we would have, on a class or cohort size of 20 companies, we thought we would have basically 15 contract-ready companies that would come out of that. And then we would, again, be creating a pipeline and moving them along over this 15 to 20-year period. Well, before the class was even over, Honeywell gave 5 contracts to 5 different companies. 13 of the companies have bids in with Honeywell right now. And again, this graduation just happened a month ago. So it exceeded all of our expectations. And then 15 of the 20 companies we now consider contract ready and have also put bids into Boston, the city of Boston. So we're very excited about that. We're working, as they mentioned, on the purchaser side here. We're helping develop certification protocols. We're looking at new financial vehicles to secure these type of systems as well. Next slide. So again, what we're encouraging is that for all of these opportunities that are presenting themselves, both at the government and the corporate side, is that we do provide rules or guidelines to encourage diversifying procurement, that we look to the full ecosystem to create the opportunities and fill the gaps. It is slowly taking hold, and we hope that it will continue. One of the things that Enterprise is now moving into is also the offshore wind industry. We were part of 3 very successful bids that just were announced in Massachusetts and Rhode Island, in which we will be helping the winners of those bids work with their tier 1 contractors in creating a pipeline and finding subcontractors for all of the offshore wind. And again, that is a game-changing opportunity for these locations, because it is changing the economy, it is bringing in new industries. So we have the opportunity to work with them to not only scale and grow MWBEs, but also to create MWBEs that can work in these industries.
We are close to time to wrap up.
All right, all done.
Thank you. Really appreciate it, and appreciate the detailed coverage of the 2 decades of work that you all have done, as well as the highlight on the Honeywell exam. I am now going to pass it over to Tabara Smith, who is the Regional Director in the Greater Washington, D.C. area at Emerald Cities Collaborative. Emerald Cities Collaborative is a leader in this field, pursuing a high road approach to greening our cities, building resilient regional economies, and strengthening our democracy. So I'll pass it over to Tabara.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me, and I'm grateful to be a part of this Scream panel as well. Emerald Cities was founded in 2009 and the first energy investment through coalition of business, labor, public, and also community to actually solve some of these system change issues that we're seeing now. So one of the things that Emerald Cities do is we have 3 bottom lines, which is greening our cities, building our communities, and strengthening our democracy. And we do that through a lot of things, but one of the things I want to mention right now is our economic inclusion portfolio. Emerald Cities have some workforce programs, but we saw a dying need in 2013 to create a holistic approach for contractors. So we identified this term called contractor development, where since 2013, we started in Los Angeles. We train and build minority contractors' capacity to bid and secure public procurement contracts. And this program is called the E-Contractor Academy, where we actually did it in around 7 cities across the country. And the whole idea is to do a 7 and 8 week program that focus on market insights of green building technology, how to actually, what's the demand of this technology, 2, access to capital, bond, and insurance that we mentioned earlier throughout the presentation. 3, how to actually bid and secure these type of projects, and actually how to actually do joint ventures. But we realized through our research and in our practice, we train over 1,000 contractors. We secure almost $50 million in procurement. But we realized contractors need a holistic approach and a more detailed approach and a whole more hand-held approach to their development. And so we kind of in the pre-development phase of actually going into this Harambee, which is a High Road Accelerated Business Institute, Minority Business Institute. And the whole idea is to focus on 5 detailed areas of contractor development growth, which is information and research. So how they can keep up to date on green building trends and new trends in decarbonization. 2 is capacity building and technical training. So how they can get up to date on certifications and different things that around business capacity. 3 is business services, how to actually get access capital, bond and insurance throughout and project financing throughout these type of things. And 4, how to actually do a group purchasing idea of making sure that they can get equipment for a cheaper price. And the 5th thing is how to actually get a stable workforce. I think it was mentioned earlier, most likely people of color that run businesses hire people that look like them. So how can you actually make sure that the economy is inclusive and they hiring people that's properly trained, so how they can connect to local workforce programs and things. But our whole model of contractor development is focused on accountability and transparency, and we partner up with not only private companies and prime contractors, but we partner up with more so public agencies. And we do that to make sure that contractors have a chance of being leaders and strengthen their business to secure bids. So thank you.
Thanks, Tavares. That was great. Really appreciate the perspective on all the work that you're doing with the Contractor Academy, Harambee, and the 5 areas that you've just flagged, and excited to dive in more during the panel. And so our last panelist is Ellen Vera, who is the co-director of Co-op Cincy. Co-op Cincy supports a growing network of worker-owned businesses in the greater Cincinnati area, and I'll turn it over to her.
Thank you so much. So great to be here today. So just to give a little bit of background of Co-op Cincy, so we are a nonprofit cooperative business incubator and network of about 15 co-op businesses currently to date. A little bit of about 125 workers that are currently working in all of our businesses. Next slide. And our whole vision is to create an economy that works for all. So we are doing that by broadening ownership in our community and really focusing on our most historically disenfranchised communities. Next slide. So this is just a little bit of background, a little bit of picture of kind of who we are and what we do. So Co-op Cincy, the incubator and network, we provide co-op education and culture building. We help existing businesses transition to worker ownership. We provide wraparound technical assistance for those businesses, help people start up new cooperative businesses through a 14-week cooperative incubator. And we also provide money to help them grow and establish their businesses through our loan fund that's a part of a national financial cooperative. So you can go to the next slide. So as a part of our work, one of our thriving businesses in the network, one of our first businesses, we've now been around for almost 13 years, is called Sustainergy Cooperative. They are a home insulation and solar business, BIPOC, majority BIPOC owned, worker owned, started by a group of immigrants, formerly undocumented folks, and have been now going at this for, since 2014. So they've got their 10-year anniversary. Some of the exciting things that they've been able to achieve in their time in business is they've been able to complete over 6,000 energy audits, have installed over 1 million pounds recycled paper and insulation in over 1,300 homes, and have been able to reduce the carbon emissions by over 1,000 metric tons. And building on our relationship here with Sustainergy, they are also unionized with United Steelworkers. And kind of out of this work is how we've been kind of digging into some of this federal money that's been coming down to really broaden ownership in this whole sector. So you can go to the next slide. So just some of the grounding of our kind of local community here in Cincinnati. Not some things that I'm proud of, but 6 out of 10 of the most common jobs in Ohio definitely don't pay enough, and 25% of Cincinnatians are living in poverty. We have this obviously amazing opportunity to really try and help deal with some of these issues with over $12.8 billion from the Inflation Reduction Act that's going to be invested in our state. And excitingly, we have a city that is very committed to kind of going in this green direction. So they've committed to 50% reduction in carbon emissions by 2030 and 100% carbon neutrality by 2050. And so it's kind of on this foundation that we applied for the Critical Job Quality Tier 1 Planning Grant, which is about $500,000 that we received last September, so just a little over a year ago now, that goes through March of next year, and with the potential for follow-on funding. And so the goal of this money is to really kind of create a community plan. So we have over 40 different partners coming from the civic sector, from labor, from the faith community, from community organizations, industry folks themselves. We have about 10 different companies at the table right now and growing, and to really come together to say, with workforce development professionals, how do we make this opportunity with the IRA the most inclusive, the most impactful possible for our community members? So you can go to the next slide, please. So we've now been bringing this group of folks together since about March of this year, and we've kind of split into 5 different working groups. And kind of out of these working groups, these are some of the strategies that are kind of rising to the top of the plan that we're putting together through this joint practice. So the first one that's been really interesting is that we have this shared services cooperative that is going to be formed by the contractors that are a part of this movement that'll really be focusing on historically under-resourced green construction firms. So an organization that they will own and control, where they will be able to figure out what are the main things that they need, but it could be shared marketing, it could be shared access to financing. But really, we're going to be focusing on the residential market because that's where we've seen the most concentration of these diverse firms, at least to start, and then working on building up pathways into larger and larger jobs. But again, this will be owned and controlled by these firms. And then the second big approach that is kind of coming out of this work is a proactive development of procurement and capital pipelines. So doing the work to tangibly build and have multiple jobs lined up for these contractors. So it's not just about training, it's not just about getting workers into these job pathways, but actually having the work to help grow these businesses kind of simultaneously being built at the same time. So we're working on a purchasing cooperative for churches and nonprofits and other smaller organizations, the development of a good green jobs business listing and certification, and then have a coordinated approach to local, regional, and national funding opportunities. And then the last big strategy that's been emerging is a proactive worker recruitment and training. So a residential green construction training program is being developed in partnership with the Central Labor Council to help bring more workers into this field, more diverse workers into this field, and really help to make sure these companies are ready as all this growth hits. So last slide, I believe. Yeah, so this is what we're doing to create good green jobs, and I'm excited to build more in this in the panel discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ellen, and thanks to all of our panelists. The work is really impressive, and we're really excited that you all have been able to join to share your insights with this group. I think from Northwest Bronx Community and Clergy Coalition's community organizing perspective, and Ellen and Co-op Cincy's, your work with this DLL grant, Enterprise's work in creating systems to link MBEs directly to procurement contracts, and the Honeywell example and the impressive results there. And Tavares Emerald City's work with deep engagement with contractors, building transparency and accountability with public agencies, and addressing some of these core challenges. So maybe the first question I'll start off with today is, what do you all see as the most significant barrier to scale MBEs? And maybe we can start with Sandra and the work that you all have been doing with weatherization assistance, and then have other folks chime in.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, this has been a question that we've been trying to figure out for multiple decades. So again, we have the weatherization assistance program, so we get federal and state funding for that, and there are very stringent bidding processes. So part of the challenge is how do many of these contractors even know about the bidding, right? So there's some communication and outreach that we do to do that, to get connected and create a comprehensive list to ensure as many folks have access to even know that these contracts exist. But I think one of the biggest challenges is the payment lags. And so like for a program like weatherization, we're allowed to give a contractor 10% of their contract up front, but then they don't get paid when their services are done. They get paid when the state comes to inspect the project. And so that, could be 3 months, it could be 6 or 9 months. And so when we're thinking about small MWBEs, their ability to have cash flow to hold that much in debt to cover their workers, to cover all their expenses is very, very challenging. And so that is probably the biggest. I think the second most important that I want to name here too is also weatherization program has very high bonding requirements and insurance requirements. And so we have seen this be a real challenge for local MWBEs, local businesses. And we actually, one of our weatherization staff told me just a few weeks ago that one of our local businesses had their insurance over double in the last 12 months with no incidents, but it's required at least a minimum of $2 million per incident of insurance, and it more than doubled, and they had to withdraw from participating because it was just a requirement. They could no longer afford that. So I think a lot of those requirements are very high threshold for local small businesses, and I think we have some ideas of how to leverage that, or what are some collective strategies to do that. But those are, I would say, the highest and most challenging problems for local businesses.
Thanks, Sandra. And yeah, it seems like a lot aligned with, restrictions associated with the program, the financing and the payment gaps, as well as insurance requirements. So it seems like there's quite a few things that you all are tackling. Other folks want to chime in on what they see as some of the major, the most significant challenge that they face in their work?
Sure, I could talk about some of the back office operations, particularly around public procurement, and like the paperwork, and having when you think about minority businesses, and in order to actually scale to the point, um, um, you need that back office operations that can actually do the Davis Bacon, that can do the build buy back better, and actually understand labor compliance. And if you think about, they don't have that back office operations, or it take a lot of time out of their schedule. So that's one thing, the operations. I think Sandra actually mentioned the access to capital, and the net 90 and 180-day payment, which is some organization, some places is getting around that, like NOLA, Bill, they have a program that can be modeled, that can scale operations, that they have a revolving loan fund that can actually think. But so it's some places that's actually trying to solve some of the issues, and but none of these things to solve it is standardized. So you have to go one place to get one thing, then another place to get another thing. So you have to think about standardizing all of these operations, that a contractor can have a one-stop shop, minority contractor can have a one-stop shop to actually get some of these services.
Yeah, thanks for that. And also thanks for naming, because I don't think we've named it otherwise in this webinar, but Davis-Bacon requirements, labor compliance requirements, that is like another critical place or barrier challenge that MBEs are facing in this field, in addition to everything else that you've named. Ellen or Deirdre, do you want to chime in on challenges that you're seeing in your work in the field?
Sure. Um, sorry.
Go ahead.
I think that the biggest challenge that we continue to see is just really changing the fundamental belief that there are no MWBEs out there that are ready or available for procurement in certain industries. And so and there's two sides to that. There's also the MWBEs can't find the RFPs that they need that they're capable of fulfilling. So you're seeing it on both sides, both on the buyer side and the supplier side, that they can't be connected. And so there's so much great work, a lot of work that everyone is talking about right now. But unless you can connect the buyer and the supplier, and again, dealing with these obstacles, but in a big way, we're going to continue to have a slow kind of trickle approach to this. And so I really, wish that we can all be better about creating that transparency between RFPs and suppliers and buyers.
I think the only thing I was just going to add is I think that's part of the reason why we've strategically in Cincinnati decided to focus in on kind of the residential and light commercial, in addition to just all the opportunity that's coming, in that sector, but also recognizing in our ecosystem, that is where so many of our more diverse contractors are. So really trying to meet them where they're at and in a place where that market access is a little, there are at least some fewer barriers, like they're already working in this field, but how do we just really magnify that? How do we aggregate that? How do we get groups of churches coming together that are in the Justice 40 that are saying, hey, we need, all this work done, and just really trying to create as big of a pipeline as possible for those, those smaller, BIPOC owned and women owned businesses. So I think I just want all the things that everyone mentioned in terms of the barriers, we're definitely hearing from our contractors, but we're trying to definitely, on the ground here, approach it from how do we get things really working well where they're already serving, and then start to help them with that wraparound TA and access to larger jobs, kind of help them stair step up there. But yes, all these barriers definitely exist.
Yeah. Thanks all for offering that perspective. And I think, Ellen, you're also sort of moving to what essentially is the next question, which is like, what are some of the solutions that you all are seeing? You presented on them, and I think that it's all super exciting coming from, the different places in your work. So Ellen, what you just named, the sort of place-based work and figuring out the demand side and aggregation there, the community organizing approach, the Northwest Bronx, sort of the longstanding work and sort of really deep engagement with contractors named for Emerald Cities, and also Enterprise, like you all like making that bridge between who those suppliers are and who's administering the contract and who's on the other side. So I think I'm not sure who wants to start, but maybe we can talk about solutions now. What do we feel like are some of the most impactful, most clear solutions in the field right now?
Solutions in the field. I'm happy to wade in if
Sure. Yeah.
into solutions in the field. I think you are seeing a movement in the field. I do think all of our work is really important, but I'm going to put a lot of what I can say accelerated change must happen at the government and at the corporation side. So there needs to be more of a commitment there. And I think we saw a lot of commitment after COVID that corporations and others were going to do a better job about engaging MWBEs and setting up systems and addressing a lot of the exclusionary kind of business practices that are out there. And I don't think it's come to fruition. And so I think we have to celebrate those companies that are doing things, but we also have to hold businesses and governments accountable. The disparity numbers, the disparity tests continue to show us. And I don't have a solution for that, but to me, that's a big obstacle. And it will lead to better solutions if people are held accountable. In Worcester, you had the Worcester Stadium there was fined $1.9 million for not using MWBs as was required as part of their contract. To me, that is a good thing. That is something that, again, we have to hold people accountable.
Thanks. And thanks for the note on accountability there. Tavares, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm curious, as far as solutions that Emerald Cities is advancing, if you would want to speak about those, and also maybe, add on to this transparency, accountability, and commitment piece as well.
Yeah, thank you. So some of the solutions that Emerald Cities are advancing. We make sure that our curriculum is tailored to fit the custom market. And I think sometimes most of the training around small business development is always broad training. So we make sure that it's also it's custom to the custom market. We personalize technical assistance. So each business is different. So we make sure that the business is that our coaching and technical assistance is personalized and to a 3 to 18 month process. We do online project tracking, so we make sure that contractors are tracking these projects online and how to actually streamline. So we match make their project size. So from project size to their business size to their bonding capacity. Sometimes that we try to do the matchmaking for them. We streamline referral services, which can actually lead to better teaching and actually better support to contractor growth. We provide expert-led training. So we do some training in-house, but we also reach out to procurement managers to actually present on projects or how to actually pre-qualify. And I think that's very important because minority contractors need that relationship. Most contracts happen through the relationship process. And I think that's very important for contractors can actually see bankers, people that's doing the financing, people that's actually doing the procurement or the contract specialist. We provide networking opportunities as well. And we just launched a grant program for small business growth where contractors can receive up to $20,000 to streamline their business and help with their back office support, which is very successful currently. And then just some of the stuff that we want to actually name. One thing about this is you have to have accountability and oversight on some of these procurement assets. I think Deidre mentioned earlier that they have to have oversight and more accountability and advocacy on that side. So Portland, for example, have a strong procurement accountability table where they will look at the procurement process and make sure that that they are achieving their goals. And if you look at any procurement system or any office of procurement that's strong on procurement, they have a lot of enforcement. Like we could talk about the Los Angeles World Airports. They have an enforcement officers that can enforce procurement, active procurement as well. So it's some things that's cross-setting in this space, but enforcement and accountability is needed to actually uplift minority contractors in this space.
Great. You spoke to a number of things, Tabaris, from accountability and transparency on the procurement side, but also one thing that I wanted to also uplift is your note about relationship building. So ensuring that contractors understand the financing, understand who the procurement managers are, and maybe to turn it over to Ellen. You're doing your work in a large coalition, so kind of wanted to hear about your thoughts on solutions and relationship building in that sense.
Yeah, no, I think it's so important when you're trying to kind of impact system change. I think by us being a part of a process where we have all these stakeholders at the table who are wanting to see our economy, really move to that green electric space, and seeing all these dollars come in, but also having the contractors there and trying to achieve these outcomes where we can have it be as impactful as possible for our folks who've historically been under-resourced. I think it's been really powerful to see that those relationships build. And so right now we're in this space where we are currently developing our procurement processes, kind of in partnership with these exact contractors that we're hoping to most advantage through this. And so I think that can be really, powerful to say, okay, how do we meet the needs of the folks who are going to be the clients, right? Who are saying, I need these jobs done, and make sure that they can get the quality work and make sure that there's kind of enough choice for them, but at the same time lifting up that we really care about things other than what is the lowest price, right? Or whose company comes off as the most professional, that we care about what are the quality jobs that are being created here, and who is in ownership and control of these businesses. So I think that's been really interesting to see, as we've been kind of holding that tension between but figuring out ways forward that can meet kind of the needs of all the groups. And again, just try to be, I think, just really intentional versus just kind of letting all these dollars come into our community and not being, intentional at how those are getting dispersed, and just kind of the same old actors is always getting access to those. So we're obviously still in the planning phases of this. We'll see how that all pans out. But I do think the fact too that we are putting those same people that we're wanting to advantage, these, women and minority contractors, or BIPOC contractors, in control of the kind of some of the solutions that we're trying to create. So that shared services cooperative, for example, is not just going to be the share, just PA providing TA to folks, but it's going to be something that an entity that they own and control and decide what are the services that we need. How can we do this together and do it better? How could we maybe jointly come together and bid on larger jobs in a way that can work for these smaller contractors? So I think the fact that we're putting them in the driver's seat and we're, doing this in coalition with all these other partners will hopefully build some really exciting outcomes.
Thank you, Ellen. So we only have a few minutes left. I'm sure we could talk about this, for so much longer. But just wanted to be able to wrap this up and offer some next steps for folks. We really appreciate everyone on the panel offering your expertise and your insights from on the ground. And I think underscoring your point, Ellen, about sort of the need to be really intentional in this moment, in all the ways that you all are working. So really appreciate that. Grant, I can turn it back over to you to do the wrap up.
Yeah, thank you all for those insights. Really informative and helpful to think about. We've been taking notes and definitely look forward to some of the follow-ups and driving some of these strategies where we connect them to the field in other places and transfer knowledge. And thank everybody who's attended here too. I know we've got folks across the country that are driving different strategies here. This is a moment where we need an ecosystem. We need new approaches, new strategies. We can't just rely on old tools to ensure that minority businesses succeed in this moment, and the time is now. And so we and Alana just dropped the report into the chat. We will follow up with an email with the report as well. And we'll be posting in a couple of different places and keep you all in the loop as that goes out. We'll really look forward to comments or insights that come up for you that you can share with us in the coming weeks. And I just want to this is a research and report moment for us. There's folks on the panel have been doing this work and are moving forward constantly, and we want to make sure that we continue to support the field using this report as a launch moment to dig in deeper on some of these strategies that are advancing. And so I just want to post in the for everybody to review and to provide feedback for us. How would you like to collaborate in this work going forward? For folks that are attending, is there different ways that you are hoping to get involved in specific things you've heard today? This is multiple choice, so feel free to answer across a number of these. We just want to make sure that we're able to support you all as effectively as we can going forward in this moment. And finally, I lost my slide deck here, so give me a second to pull up our closing slide. But we're really grateful for everybody's time and energy being here today. Looks like Sarita's dropped her contact information. I'm just going to share our slide so everybody has mine and Sarita's contact for next steps and moving this work forward, and making sure that we continue to support you all in the ways that you need it to get this out in the world. One second. So again, we'll be following up later this week with email to everybody, circulating the report, giving feedback around what we've heard from the polls. Thank you for participating, those that have. Hopefully a couple more of those will come in the coming minutes. And then we'll get started on thinking about what we can do to advance this work and support it through MIT CoLab and Kyanite. Our emails are there, and they will also be in the follow-up email to you all.
Thank you.